My sermon text is 1 Corinthians chapter 13. I should say the sermon text. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith, so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have, and if I deliver my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful. It is not arrogant or rude. Love does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrong, but rejoices in the right. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. For our knowledge is imperfect, and our prophecy is imperfect. But when the perfect comes, the imperfect will pass away. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part. Then I shall understand fully, even as I have been fully understood. So faith, hope, love abide, these three. But the greatest of these is love. Here ends this reading of these words inspired by God. May God grant us wisdom and courage for interpretation. Now, I cautioned the search committee and the deacons that there would be times in the semester, in the seminary semester, where I simply would not have time to prepare a sermon. It takes anywhere from 8 to 12 hours for me, from the idea to research to writing to practicing, to prepare a sermon. And I was in Tulsa Thursday night, all day Friday, and all day Saturday on top of working my full-time job. And this is one of those weeks I couldn't prepare a sermon. But I also promised that nothing that I had to give y'all would be thrown together. It would at least be thoughtful. And so I'm thoughtfully presenting this vintage sermon from Harry Emerson Fosdick from 1946. He was a mainline national voice in the 30s, 40s, and beyond. He was sort of Billy Graham before Billy Graham, but a mainline version. He was part of the national debate, whatever the debate was, at a time when the mainline churches were at the height of their influence and their existence in this country. This sermon resonates through the decades. The language is a little dated, well, significantly dated, and I'm not going to change it. It's popular to upgrade language for the sake of feelings and political correctness, but for the sake of the authenticity of this man and his message and his time and his place, I'm going to leave the words as they are, knowing that we wouldn't use these words today. He was also a rational Christian voice at a time when fundamentalism was rising, and the mainline church was trying to, as all the churches were, trying to cope with the challenges of science as they challenged faith. I invite you to listen to his sermon from 1946 and look for similarities and contrasts between his time and ours. Think about how some of what he says about the world then might apply to this country internally. And note the absence of words like terrorism and terrorists. It predates all that. And note the absence of the word Muslim. But you'll see, I think, where you can apply those concepts into what he says. So without further ado, from his book, On Being Fit to Live With, Sermons on Post-War Christianity, copyright 1946 by Harper and Brothers. Fosdick's sermon on being fit to live with. A year of disenchantment, remarkable for the number and magnitude of illusions which have perished in it. that fairly well describes this 12-month following World War II. Yes, but those words were written in 1867 after the war between the states. We are not the first generation to live through post-war disillusionment with its confusion and dismay. The futility of war, the transiency of its victories, its fecundity in producing problems worse and more numerous than any that it solves. This is an ancient experience. What distinguishes our generation in dealing with it is the global scale on which it confronts us. Never before has the whole human race been involved together in such a general and inclusive catastrophe as ours. Many, therefore, stand looking at the world's calamity as at a gigantic spectacle, its problems so staggering that we as individuals feel unrelated to it, our ability irrelevant to its solution. I do not see how we can stay there, however, if we perceive what the gist of the world's problem really is: being fit to live with. Our one world calls desperately for that. Wives and husbands, parents and children, Russia and the United States, Britain and India, Orientals and Occidentals, whites and Negroes, Roman Catholics, Jews and Protestants, the world with catastrophe awaiting failure is crying for those qualities of life and character that make men and nations fit to live with. If this seems oversimplification, I agree that it is a minimum statement, but it has this advantage. It presents a responsibility none can deny, each of us knowing that he is under obligation, at least, to be decent to live with, and each of us also, day by day, either adding to or subtracting from that basic quality: fitness to live together, without which no problem in the world can ever be solved. Paul was dealing with this matter when he wrote his 12th chapter of 1 Corinthians. Many members, but one body. And the eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of thee. Or again, the head to the feet, I have no need of you. Whether one member suffereth, all the members suffer with it. Or one member is honored, all the members rejoice with it. Applied to our world's estate now, that simile represents a momentous fact. Races and nations forced to live together before we are fit to live with. Facing that kind of situation, Paul swung out into his 13th chapter on love, driven to it by the logic of the situation, saying that only love can meet the issue. That is not simple, but penetrating, far-reaching, and profound. Of course, being fit to live with is the secret of a good home. Many associate broken homes primarily with outright infidelity, but any personal counselor sees homes where even adultery has been forgiven, but where some other things can no longer be endured. And other homes too he sees where infidelity did not come first, but last, after a long, long series of other troubles had paved the way. It is what many people call little things that commonly break up homes: sullenness, moodiness, hypersensitiveness, irritability, petty jealousy, quarreling, nagging, bad temper. That's to say, the things that make folk unfit to live with. As one wife said about her husband, who was an actor, he was a comedian on the stage, but he was a tragedian at home. Some of us came from homes lovely to live in, and considering what made them such, we see why Paul moved out from his 12th chapter into his 13th. That is what it takes to be fit to live with in a home. Love suffereth long and is kind. Love envieth not. Love vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up, doth not behave itself unseemly, seeketh not its own, is not provoked, taketh not account of evil. Love beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. Our theme is not oversimplification. It fathoms the depths of our lives. It is about the loveliest thing that can be true of us, that we really are fit to live with. On a large scale, this is the world's problem. Today, we all are thinking of the vast political overhead the United Nations is trying to build up. Indispensable. But here in the Church of Christ, consider the foundations of it all, the spiritual bases on which alone a peaceful world can stand. Races and nations decent to live with, that alone will do it. And one by one, we individually are in the thick of that. Every unfair discrimination a white man practices against a Negro, every nasty slur voiced by a Gentile against Jews, or by a Jew against Gentiles, every expression of contempt against a whole race or nation, every outburst of meanness, discourtesy, prejudice, and bad temper makes less possible the solution of mankind's gigantic problem. Our theme brings the whole world's deepest need within the scope of every man's responsibility. We have always talked about world brotherhood. It was a beautiful ideal, but now the entire aspect of the matter has altered. World brotherhood no longer an ideal, but the absolute condition of civilization's survival. It is world brotherhood now or else. To be sure, for decades, the realistic facts of worldwide interdependence have been creeping up on us, but still we have clung to old nationalistic ideas, picturing the world's peoples, to use another metaphor, as strung together without continuity like wash on a line. But for a long time now, the world's races and nations have been growing less and less like wash on a line. Their economic interdependence, for example, becoming more obvious every year. Where do our telephone instruments come from? Our telephone instruments. Japanese silk, Indian mica, Malay rubber, Irish flax, Russian platinum, Egyptian cotton, South African gold. These are a few items in an ordinary telephone. This kind of thing, after a fashion, we've known, but now the dramatic conquest of the air, the shrinking of the planet in travel time, and the release of atomic power have suddenly confronted us with history's most momentous crisis, long building up, but unmistakably here at last. Races and nations forced to live together before we are fit to live with. The most serious aspect of this situation is that being fit to live with is a spiritual matter. It can be politically expressed, but it cannot be politically manufactured. It must start in the intelligence, conscience, and goodwill of people. Can we meet that test of survival now? And it takes us all in. We should be able to do this much. Stop talking about international peace, world brotherhood, and all that as beautiful ideals. They are no longer ideals, but hard-headed, desperately necessary endeavors to catch up with the realistic facts. It is the facts, not the ideals, that have gone far, far ahead of us. Facts of conquered distance, compulsory interdependence, enforced propinquity, inescapable relationships as members of one body. The facts have outdistanced us, and every endeavor after world brotherhood is simply the spirit of man trying to catch up with the facts before it's too late. As Prime Minister Attlee said, we cannot make a heaven in our own country and leave a hell outside. No, the day has passed for that. The phrase being up to date is commonly used in trivial ways, but think what it means to be up to date now. At the very least, it means being citizens of the world. Josiah Quincy was one of the early legislators of this nation, but in 1811, when the admittance of Louisiana to the Union was proposed and was violently resisted by the Federalists, Josiah Quincy said in Congress, "If this bill passes, the bonds of this Union are virtually dissolved, and it will be the right of all, so it will be the duty of some, to prepare definitely for a separation, amicably if they can, violently if they must." So lightly to propose secession from the federal union. How could he? He said once, "The first public love of my heart is the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. There is my fireside. There are the tombs of my ancestors." See, we should like to say to him now, you were far behind the times when you talked like that. The welfare of Massachusetts was involved in the Union. It could never be well with Massachusetts without the Union. Intelligently to care for Massachusetts meant putting the Union first. Only with national loyalty and unity paramount could any state be safe. It would be easy for us so to talk to Josiah Quincy, but we ourselves are in a similar case. Now for us to put the nation first is to be disloyal to the nation. The world comes first. It can never be well with the nation unless it is well with the world. If the world goes to hell, the nation will go with it. To see that, to act on the basis of that in personal and public attitudes, to become citizens of the world, that is just catching up with the facts. More than that, it is catching up at last with the New Testament. The field is the world. We Americans had better watch our step now. We naturally take it for granted that we are fit to live with. Granted, we are doing some good work, but we are close to being the most powerful single nation on earth, and we had better not flourish that power around as we're tempted to. What if some other nation, Russia for example, were the most powerful nation on earth? What if she alone possessed the secret of the atomic bomb's manufacture? What if she in the Pacific blew up millions of dollars worth of ships with her bombs? And what if she frankly said what our American admiral in charge of the experiment has said is the purpose of it? First, to translate the result into terms of U.S. sea power. And second, to train Army Air Forces personnel in attack with atomic bombs against ships. Suppose Russia were doing that. How would we feel? Alas, all the great powers, Russia not least of all, now are trying to move in two directions at once. On one side, supporting the United Nations to abolish war, and on the other, beginning what may prove to be the most fatal competitive armament race in history to prepare for war. In this country, proposing to establish for the first time in our history universal military conscription in peacetime. The nations cannot pursue both these purposes at once, not for long. May God bring us all up to date before the bell tolls. As our own Secretary of State put it, there must be one world for all of us, or there will be no world for any of us. So whether in a home or the world, this is man's critical need to be fit to live with, and it takes us all in. Consider now that if we are to meet this momentous issue anywhere, in a home or a neighborhood or a world, we must follow Paul out from his 12th chapter into his 13th. A biblical scholar once whimsically said that one of the strongest arguments he knew for the inspiration of Scripture was that they had survived their division into chapters and verses. Nowhere has that division been more disadvantageous than in 1 Corinthians. Sometimes we read the 12th chapter by itself and forget what comes after. Often we read the 13th chapter by itself at every wedding we've ever been to. And we forget what went before. But when Paul wrote his letter, what we call the 12th chapter poured out like a river into the 13th. The moving current of his thought demanded it. If we are many members in one body, then hate will not do. Vengeance, ill will, selfishness, not by them can the problems of such interdependence be solved. Only love can solve them. Now, love in the New Testament is not a sentimental and affectionate emotion, as we so commonly interpret it. There are three words in Greek for love. Three words that we have to translate by our one word, love. Eros. Erotic comes from it. That's one. In vulgar use, it meant sensual lust. In Platonic philosophy, it meant the yearning of the soul for the realm of the gods. The New Testament never employs that word. Both in vulgar and in philosophic usage, it had connotations that would not do. Philia, that is another Greek word. It meant intimate, personal affectionateness and friendship. The New Testament does use that 25 times when intimate affectionateness is meant. But the great Christian word for love is something else, agape. Over 250 times the New Testament uses it. And agape means nothing sentimental or primarily emotional at all. It means understanding, redeeming, creative goodwill. The New Testament commands us to love, for example, but no one can command us to feel intimate affection for another. That is not within our volition's power. What the Christian God can and does command us to do, however, is to practice always and everywhere with friend and enemy, with neighbors close at hand, and with strangers we have never seen, and understanding and creative goodwill. Whatsoever ye would that men should do unto you, even so do ye also to them. That is the expression of agape. Love your neighbor as yourself. That is agape. Love your enemies. It's nonsense to command that if it means feeling affection for our foes. But if it means, as it does, extending even to them an understanding, saving, creative goodwill so that by God's grace enemies may at last be turned into friends, that makes sense. Love the Russians, millions of them. Love the Chinese, the Indians, the South Sea Islanders, and all the rest. No wonder men think that idea is silly when they interpret it to mean emotional affectionateness. But to extend to the Russians, the Chinese, and all the world understanding and creative goodwill, that is not silly, but the sine qua non of civilization's survival now. A little child in a family I know heard the phrase, human beings, and he asked its meaning. It means all of us, was the answer. Father, mother, brother, sister, our neighbors. Everyone we know is a human being. But, said the child, all the people we do not know, are they human beings too? That is the towering question now, and agape answers it. To see all men, near and far, as sons of God, to practice understanding and creative goodwill to all men as human beings, that is the Christian ethic. Just now, this is critically important because so many of us are relying on a lower range of motive. Fear, for example. Will not the atomic bomb frighten mankind into brotherhood and peace? Well, the atomic bomb presents an ominous alternative, and there can be a constructive use of fear. But no man or nation was ever yet frightened into real brotherhood and peace. Along with fear, we are relying on selfish calculation to save us. We can have nothing, we say, that we do not share. Freedom from deadly epidemics is a worldwide matter now. We must share health with all men if we are securely to possess it ourselves. So we argue about one good after another, from economic welfare to freedom from the tragedy of war. That's all true. No major good can be possessed in this new world unless it's shared. We'd better say that. But such selfish calculation by itself alone can never bring real brotherhood and peace. When American missionaries went to the South Sea Islands, did they argue it all out that someday there might be a world war? And American boys might come there, and so on the basis of selfish calculation, Christ had better be preached and practiced there first. They did not. They never thought of it. It was the Christian gospel that took them there, stronger than fear, nobler than self-interest. All men children of God, all men the object of Christ's redeeming sacrifice. Love the law of life. Mankind, one family with every soul, priceless in the sight of God. That and that alone took them to the South Sea Islands. That alone transformed cannibals into folk finally fit to live with. This recognition of the New Testament's meaning of agape dissolves the two strict lines of distinction now currently drawn between love and justice. To be sure, these two are not identical. All of love is not included in justice, but the deepest meanings of justice are included in love. And without love and the insight and understanding it confers, justice inevitably degenerates into injustice. The golden rule, the essence of justice, is not outside, but within the boundaries of Christian love. And today it is the political implementation of the golden rule in some effective form of world government that most concerns us. Only so can we be fit to live together. The political difficulties in the way everyone sees, but behind them are the emotional difficulties inside the hearts of men. Were there ever such sweeping mass emotions of distrust and suspicion, vindictiveness and hatred on earth before? Mankind's hope lies in those who resist such regimentation by vindictive mass emotions, rising above them to an altitude more far-sighted, constructive, and redeeming. How did Abraham Lincoln ever do that as he did during the Civil War? With malice toward none, with charity for all, he said. He was not soft. He was the wisest man of his generation, and his wisdom consisted how much in his ability to rise above the popular passions of vindictiveness. I have not suffered by the South, he said to a friend. I have suffered with the South. Their pain has been my pain. Their loss has been my loss. In retrospect, how high his character towers, how constructive his wise statesmanship. In our world now, there are vicious evils to be ended, their resurgence made impossible, their guilty perpetrators punished. But God help us for our children's sake to rise into agape and in a redeeming peace that at last will take all nations in, to do for the world what so-called justice without agape can never do. Ah, Christ, you are the answer still. We want world brotherhood. All that we and our children most desire depends on that, but neither fear nor calculating self-interest alone can achieve it. We must have faith. That is basic. We must have hope. That certainly. And we must have love. And if we are to be really fit to live with, in families, neighborhoods, nations, and one world, the greatest of these is love. Amen.